welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode, I'll be discussing the 1993 fantasy adventure Super Mario Brothers, as directed by Morton and Annabel Jankel, and indeed as based upon the ever-popular Nintendo game franchise featuring the tenacious plumbing brothers Mario and Luigi. Working as plumbers in Brooklyn, Mario as played by Bob Hoskins and Luigi as played by John Leguizamo befriend Daisy as played by Samantha, Mathis, an NYU archaeology student working on a dig that has uncovered some interesting archaeological finds. However, the blast that uncovered the site also opened a portal to another dimension. A dimension where dinosaurs evolved to become the dominant species, evolving into humanoid-like forms, ruled by one of the most ruthless of them all, King Koopa, as played by Dennis Hopper. After Daisy is kidnapped by a couple of Koopa's goons, it is left up to Mario and Luigi to travel to the Dino Dimension to bring her back, little knowing that they're about to get embroiled in a plot by Koopa to merge both our and the dinosaurs' dimensions together. With the future of humanity's very existence at stake, and Koopa looking to take our universe's resources for himself, will our two intrepid plumbers have the right tools for the job? So, Super Mario Brothers. Where to start with this one? Well, first and foremost, it holds the status as being the very first live-action movie to ever be based on a video game. You may ask, after this, however, how in the world did any other game-to-movie transition ever get made? The thing is, movies based on video games have always had a bit of a checkered history, a checkered past, and they never kind of really got off to a good start with this somewhat oddly kind of transcribed rendition of one of the most popular franchises of its time, probably of all time. But there's just something about this very first attempt that I can't help but love and have done ever since it was actually first released. Yes, I can't deny it's probably about the only place you're ever going to see both Bob Hoskins and Dennis Hopper in pantomime together. But then that's very much part of its quirky charm, absolutely priceless in that respect. The way everything is kind of played out is almost like a circus act, but feeding very much into the style of that time for such kind of comic book and fantasy adventures. And in that, it does feel like they kind of really didn't know how to approach the source material and translate this into a feature-length adaptation. The style used very much kind of camps things up, trying to retain much of the lightheartedness of the franchise, yet adding a kind of number of darker elements and themes to try and appeal to as wide an audience as possible. Gaming was, at the time, 1993, gaming was pretty much a kind of niche, when they released this, but kind of gaming, gaining some traction as a more widestream form of entertainment. And this movie feels like it's kind of caught somewhere in the crosshairs of that transition, not really knowing its place, but still wanting to entertain. On first glance, it really does strike you that it really doesn't seem like anybody had actually played the games before making this film. Quite an essential part of the process, I've got to think. It seems so far away from the franchise. It seems unbelievable and inconceivable that anybody who'd actually had love for the games themselves would have kind of come up with such a wildly weird, in fact, hopscotch kind of arrangement and approach to a plot that was seemingly plucked from nowhere. But, however, back in 1993, and I'll stress that again, what did they really have to go on? These days, Mario's garnered a whole franchise of tie-ins, characters, villains, stories, lands, universes, and other versions of games and media that prove, and provide a very rich and diverse soup of source material. However, back in 1993, things were kind of really just taking off, and given this to go out and develop a unique story with only a fraction of the ideas, and even the kind of the fan base to some extent, was quite a feat. Perhaps not executed like it should have been, I'm not going to say no, or kind of hoped for, but at least we are still left with quite the fantastical adventure. And in actual fact, I'm going to come to its defence here, I am. It actually includes more references to the games and the characters than at first it may appear. It opts to take a more subtle approach to the kind of inclusion. Sometimes they're in the strangest of ways that you wouldn't have even imagined. And, and kind of a bit more of a subtle approach to the inclusion than many other such game adaptations have chosen to do. And in that, some may end up kind of being overlooked. But right down to the way some of the Gumba's guns produce balls of fire, the blink and you miss it reference to the bullet bills, the timer bombs that are always the vein of my life when I'm playing the games, and even a thought to kind of include Yoshi as a character. It's all a bit mixed up, I'm not going to lie. But including all of those elements at some level did feel like a decent attempt to make this kind of gaming elements fit a live action setting. Listen very carefully, and you can actually hear there are more than a few of Mario's distinctive themes included, along with a round of the kind of game's sound effects and other references to the games of that era. Again, very subtle, but it is there. It's under the surface. Personally, I think this was probably a ploy to kind of include the games in some way, but to kind of downplay them a bit so as not to kind of appear as looking to appeal to a narrow fan base, Mario had a fan base, don't get me wrong, and in 1993 I'm pretty sure it was impressive, but not like it is today, But either way, for me, it's still a blast trying to kind of pinpoint that those that they had actually thought to include, and decided to include. I would be the first to agree that the dinosaur crossover story is a bit of a gimmick and never really plays out all that well. There was next to no consideration for the biology or mechanics of it all, of anything at any level. No real scope or inclination to really build the dino well beyond anything that was required for functionality. And I think that is where it really did miss out. It was so disjointed in that respect. For those involved, I know that they see this film as a bit of a blemish on their resumes. But although I can't argue, it's probably not a high point in their careers. It's not, everybody does give it their all. It really does seem that way. It's played with a tremendous energy, even if the end product wasn't wholly befitting of this, It's clear to see that there was a belief at the time that they were putting their very best out there. Now, of course, in retrospect, we can all look back with a more jaded view, but I'll tell you what, regardless, they still entertained. They still brought some on-screen magic, even if it was probably more cabaret than Cirque du Soleil, For me, the movie is always going to be heavily nostalgic. It can do no wrong, so just bear that in mind. I can see its flaws, sure, but this will always have a special place in my heart, being very much a steadfast part of my childhood, and one of the collective films kind of released around that time that spared my love for movies. 1993 seemed like it was the year of the dinosaur, what with the release of the phenomenal Steven Spielberg movie Jurassic Park. And this kind of fed nicely into that kind of hysteria that followed, whether intentionally or not, offering almost a kind of B-movie alternative, like counterpart to the juggernaut blockbuster that kind of kept the dino experience rolling. It was also one of my very first leaps into another dimension. And although it never really explains much or kind of delves into any kind of real science fiction elements, it was a light introduction nonetheless into the idea that such worlds could exist. I mean, imagine blowing your imagination wide open like that and how they may actually look. I've certainly kind of carried that initial kind of wide-eyed wonderment with me ever since making that leap of faith with Mario and Luigi all of those years ago. So overall, this film certainly gets a bad rep these days. It got a bad rep when it was released. But for me, it's always going to be that tremendously nostalgic little piece of 90s magic. That's its own piece of history, a weird and distinctive time capsule of early 90s cinema. Watching it back now, I can't argue, it's all pretty surreal, but there's a wonderfully childlike naivety to it. Kind of like being at a carnival that, for me, just ends up being some nice, easy-going sci-fi schlock. It's a screwball comic book comedy, that's what I'm trying to say. At times it kind of struggles to connect with the franchise from which it is derived, struggling to really kind of find its own tone and way forward. not really knowing what it was or how such a property would kind of exist outside of the gaming world. You know, what would people want from that? For me, simply, there's not a world I want to imagine where this movie doesn't exist. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you at SciFirst Movie Talk. Definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.